I am Steve Welch. I'm the executive director of Invite Welcome Connect, just beginning my second year in that role. I'm happy to be with you all here, and I thank you all for coming. You may have noticed, and we're very, very fortunate today to have two icons of the church with us today. First off, we're joined today by Canon Jenni Faires, who's joining us from the Diocese of Southwestern Virginia, where she is the canon for evangelism and church vitality. And Jenni goes around the diocese. She leads vestry retreats. She consults with church leadership and tracks trends in the larger church. She does a lot of work on Invite, Welcome, Connect and similar kind of ministries with the people in her diocese. And so we're very fortunate to have her here with us, and we thank her. Jenni, thank you and welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
We're also joined today by Mary MacGregor, who is one of our Invite, Welcome, Connect on-demand instructors, as well as she does some of our live workshops sometimes. She worked for nearly 20 years in the Episcopal Diocese of Texas as canon for congregational vitality, and in her so-called retirement, she instructs for Invite, Welcome, Connect. She is on our board of directors, and she's also both a trainer and a consultant, and has worked with 40 dioceses in the church in ministry assessment, vestry life, visioning, and new church initiatives. Mary, thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this. I know you have a particular passion for small congregation ministry.
Oh, absolutely. I think Jenni and I both do. So it's great to be here.
All right. Thank you both. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jenni and to Mary.
We are thrilled that you all have taken an hour out of your day. We hopefully will make this a productive time for you to learn and be inspired about Invite, Welcome, Connect, especially its utilization in small churches. So thank you. Thank you for taking the time out. And before we get started, I want to open with a prayer. And I'm going to open with a prayer that is in the book, Invite, Welcome, Connect. Looks like this. If you've never seen it, it's available online at Amazon and Forward Movement. And the prayer for welcome is on page 71 of the old edition. It's been reprinted 5 times, and in the newest printing, it's on page 73. So let us pray. Gracious Lord, we pray this day with holy intention to live into our baptismal covenant, to become reflections of Christ in everything we do. We ask you for the grace to see others as Jesus sees them in the way of love and compassion and forgiveness. Let us welcome the stranger with open arms. Help us serve faithfully, taking the challenge of creativity seriously, and opening our hearts and minds with holy listening and loving souls. Amen. All right, so let's just jump in. So we have titled the 3 webinars we are doing on small churches and Invite, Welcome, Connect. And our opening one is Hospitality as Our Compass. When Jenni and I got together to decide on how we were going to lay out the webinars, we decided to start with welcome because it seems to be the one that people find the easiest, perhaps, to begin to work on, or the one that may need enhancing. And so we have designed this hour around the portion of Invite, Welcome, Connect that is welcome. And we have particular objectives for today. And these are the things we're going to talk about in the upcoming 55 minutes. We're going to go over some statistics and characteristics of small churches that really make them unique. We're going to review the values of Invite, Welcome, Connect as they relate to small congregations. We're going to talk about getting started or enhancing your Invite, Welcome, Connect ministry in a small context, church. We're also going to go into some practical aspects, real practical information about what we think are a part and essential to small churches and Invite, Welcome, Connect. We're going to talk about greeters, and greeters are really an essential element to Invite, Welcome, Connect, and then we will address your questions and comments through the chat. So Jenni, talk about some small church facts.
Well, first of all, hello, and thank you so much for having me. I'm just really thankful to be here today, and as just to explore part of the work that we do here in the Diocese of Southwestern Virginia and with Invite Welcome Connect. Our small churches are the lifeblood of the Episcopal Church, but not just the Episcopal Church, as you can see from the slide, for the larger church in general. Most of our churches are classified as small, which means full-time clergy are a luxury, and much of our ministry is being done by lay leaders or part-time or retired clergy. This makes congregational development resources like Invite, Welcome, Connect, which I find to be quite accessible for lay people, exceptionally important as our small churches begin to think about expanding their reach. As Steve said in the introduction, I serve in the Diocese of Southwestern Virginia. More than 50% of our churches are considered small churches. In addition to the statistics that you see on the screen, I want to share a couple of my observations about the changing landscape of the small church and why I think this time is so pivotal for us to begin to pay attention to the principles of Invite, Welcome, Connect. First, our rural communities are evolving. Our small churches have typically been generationally filled. Families have kept attendance steady as they typically stayed in the same communities and attended the same churches. Intentionality around invitation and welcome wasn't as necessary because everyone knew each other or everyone was related, or they also came from the same communities. Today, fewer and fewer young people return to their rural communities, which puts our generational churches in jeopardy. Rural churches are seeing their congregations get much older, with younger members not returning. This is creating a new urgency to undertake evangelism efforts. On the flip side, the suburbs are extending further and further out into our rural communities. What was once farmland is now full of large developments with families looking for a new church home. Our small churches are recognizing that they have something to offer to the community and want to know how to go about sharing their stories. As we recognize these changing demographics, Invite, Welcome, and Connect becomes very relevant to our small churches.
Steve, I'd like to talk about just a little bit of statistical information too. Some of you may be familiar with some work that was done by Arlen Rutledge decades ago in discerning particular characteristics of size. And this, I just wanted to briefly go through this because you might have heard your church referred to as a family-sized church or pastoral-sized church. These are the breakouts of the average attendance at these different sized churches. But for today, we're going to really focus on the family-sized church, a small church, with maybe moving a little bit into a pastoral-sized church. And for the sake of our conversation, we're going to say churches that are not larger than an average of 75 people present on Sunday, being an average. So we're really looking at a smaller context.
So one of the most common statements that I hear when I visit a small congregation is, we have people walking through our parking lot to go to the non-denominational church on the corner. Or I also hear the large church has all the people and we don't have any. Let me assure you that the expectant visitor to your small church is looking for something very different than what they get out of the larger non-denominational church on the corner. Second, it is important to talk about what our small churches do offer that are different from larger churches. When a person visits, these are the types of conversation starters that help separate our small churches from our larger churches. If you look at our slide here, I think we could all agree that these are some of the things that make small churches unique. A warm and family-like atmosphere, opportunities for deep involvement. And I love this third one because you really see this in small churches, that children are known, loved, and raised up in the church. I recently visited a church where a 4-year-old read the lessons with her mother, and you just don't have this opportunity in some of the larger churches. But to sum up this slide, small churches offer relationship, the opportunity to know and to be known. This really is why Mary and I wanted to start with welcome, because only 30% of invitations will be responded to, but 100% of the people that show up in your churches will want to be or need to be welcomed.
Indeed. And can I mention also that I feel a couple of characteristics we really want to know is that the organizational structures of small churches are really more flexible. They're not like larger churches, and in many ways that can be a good thing. But when we talk about the intentionality of invite, welcome, connect, sometimes we need to take on a little bit of structure, a little bit of organization, and that is something that we're not as accustomed to doing. And this final comment here, welcome is often very informal without a systematic approach, but invite, welcome, connect really asks you to be systematic no matter your size.
Absolutely. Okay, but this is what we all fear. Our next slide is a small clip from Weird Science, which maybe dates me a bit. But I think when you watch this, I think we will all understand what our fear is about small churches.
Lisa? Yeah? I don't think we belong here.
Oh, that's too funny. Well, I hope all of you are laughing right now, because I really do feel like, we've all had that experience when we walk into a place and everyone turns and looks. And so what we hope to do is sort of change the conversation around what it feels like to walk into a small church. We can't help that it is a different feeling, but what we want to do is make it one that can quickly be overcome. All right, so this is where invite, welcome, connect can help. Our slide says while small churches are more flexible, and that is true. There are fewer people, there's less red tape. Sometimes it does feel overwhelming to start something new. And so this is what we wanted to start today. When I work with a congregation, the principles of invite, welcome, connect do sit at the top of my toolbox. However, the most common feedback that I get is that it seems impossible to start, or sometimes even just overwhelming in general. And then come to find out, invite, welcome, connect had been hearing some similar feedback, which is why we had started this conversation to begin with. This is still a work in progress, so I do hope that you will drop specific questions in our chat or send an email to any of us with suggestions on the type of resources that we could offer that could serve you better. I am super passionate about this. I want to begin for our small churches to feel comfortable and empowered, and which is why I came to Invite, Welcome, Connect to talk specifically about small churches.
When Invite, Welcome, Connect was first created many, many years ago by Mary Palmer in Beaumont, Texas, we invited her into the diocesan office to have a conversation about what they were doing, because the church where she was on staff was growing so rapidly that we really wanted to know just exactly what's going on. And in that sharing and in that time together, we discerned that there were some basic values around Invite, Welcome, Connect. First of all, it's not a program. It doesn't have a beginning. It doesn't have an end. It's an essential ministry that frames the way a church invites, the way they welcome people, and the way they connect people into relationship, into the community. And along with that, there are some core values that are so good that you can literally look at everything you're doing in terms of inviting, welcoming, and connecting. And these are the values. First and foremost, it must be prayerful. This is not a in a box, grow your church program. This is about the culture of a church becoming seriously prayerful about what God is calling them to do, and perhaps do some things differently when it comes to inviting and welcoming and connecting. It's about being intentional about the things you decide to do. It is about relationship. Everything that we do with these new people, how are they relating to us? How are we relating to them? And finally, how are we accounting for these practices that are new? These things we might not have done before, or we are revamping or redoing or stopping and starting new things. So when you look at the values of Invite, Welcome, Connect, you can say, let's say, for instance, your welcome ministry. When you make some decisions about how are we going to do welcome ministry in a more systematic way, and we tried for a while, we can look back on it and say, how prayerful were we when we undertook this ministry? And then we can say, were we intentional? And how did we relate these newcomers, these visitors, these guests into conversation, in relationship on a very initial effort? And then finally, how accountable are we for getting this done? So it's a wonderful measure, these values, for everything you do. So what do you do to get started? So some of you on this webinar today have Invite, Welcome, Connect ministries in place, and perhaps you want to enhance them, enrich them, maybe even put some things down and restart them. And then there's some of you who have not integrated these practices and principles into the life of your small church. The beauty of being a small congregation is that you can educate the entire congregation on what is Invite, Welcome, Connect. That is very, very hard to do in a larger congregation. But you have the advantage of being able to educate everyone. And, you know, that education is that starting place where people begin to understand and to take seriously what are the things we are trying to do? What is God calling us to do in these aspects of ministry? So these are just some suggestions of ways you can educate your entire congregation on Invite, Welcome, Connect. And first, you can have a meeting on a Saturday or a Sunday after church with lunch and a presentation. And the presentation can be done by anyone who's looked at our resources online, who's looked at our book, who's read our book. There are videos to watch. There's all sorts of things. But actually, you can just start there, and you can say, you know, we're not very good at evangelism. You know, Mary Palmer likes to say that Episcopalians invite someone to church once every 37 years. I know that is joking, but really, we have a real problem with evangelism, because I guess we don't want to be associated with evangelism that really jumps down people and forces things on people. And many of us join the Episcopal Church because we don't want to be about that. And so we have to take on evangelism. It's about the Great Commission. I mean, we could just go back to what Jesus said. He said, baptize and teach and make disciples and send them out into the world. So we can't get around the Great Commission. And so that's so important. So we could have a meeting, a very simple meeting on a Saturday or Sunday. We can do a book study, the book I just showed you. Everyone in the church or every family could buy one book, and we could have a book study. And we actually have a book study guide on our website that divides the book into 7 sessions. So you could have 7 meetings. These could be on Sundays after church that last 1 hour. where we study the book and we answer the questions and we begin to dive into what does it mean and why is it important to invite people? What's that relationship with evangelism? What's the relationship of hospitality and welcome? And what's the relationship of people coming to belong to our community and connecting? You could also pool your area churches. This is done quite a bit. We've had many churches who take neighboring churches, might even be 50 miles away, an Episcopal church, or 100 miles away, and invite them to one of our standard workshops. It is a 5 to 6 hour workshop where it is fully explained, and it's a creative process. It's a lot of fun, but we have a lot of churches around the country have done that. So if your church is very small, you could pool with some larger churches. You can get in touch with Steve and get that on your schedule to have your people participate in that. And D, I'm wondering what is behind there. Sermon series on evangelism, hospitality, and belonging. If you're fortunate enough to have clergy who are connected to you in some way, we can ask them to start this ministry by doing a series on what does Scripture say about evangelism, what does Scripture say about hospitality and belonging, and trust me, there are so many references, and a lot of these references are in the book also. And then finally, doing these things set you up to see who might be interested in being part of a team. I've often said Invite, Welcome, Connect is not a Lone Ranger ministry. This isn't something where perhaps a priest or a rector or a vicar might say, Mary, you're in charge of Invite, Welcome, Connect. It just doesn't work that way. Invite, Welcome, Connect is headed up by a leadership team. The team may be small. It may be just 3 people. Or maybe as large as 6 or 7 people, but you want to work as a team because that's where the creativity comes. That's where the accountability happens. We suggest that if you're going to start this ministry, to start by having regular scheduled meetings. Again, that's intentional. Perhaps you have meetings every 2 weeks for 6 months to get the boost. And as you get into it and you have ministries established and you are refreshing and looking at what you're doing and wanting to add some things, you might meet a little less often. But we really recommend that Invite, Welcome, Connect be led by a team. Every church is going to be different. Sometimes the team will have the priest on it. Often the team will not have a priest on it. Sometimes if you have a staff person, you might have that person included, sometimes not. Sometimes a vestry person, sometimes not. So it's totally up to you the way you want to organize that team. Then you move into assessing where you are. When you use the assessments that we have online, and actually on the third webinar that we're going to do, we are designing an assessment specifically for small congregations. But in the meantime, we have good assessment tools online that have questions you can answer. It's very helpful. You can choose items out of the assessments that relate directly to you. Part of this vision of Invite, Welcome, Connect being overwhelming is, yes, we have a lot of information online. But just keep in mind that we had to design these tools to cover any size church, from very small to very large. And so that's why some of them go into a great detail. The thing about being a small congregation is you can pick and choose. You don't have to follow the outline directly. They are conversation starters and to help you all know where you are. One of the key things about getting started with Invite, Welcome, Connect is creativity. We want you to brainstorm about the possibilities, not hampered by, oh, that's going to cost too much money, or we don't have enough people to do that. We want you to get the ideas on the table, and then you can have a conversation about it. And then as a small church, what we recommend you do is choose 2 goals. that you want to achieve in the next 6 months. This may be as simple as starting up a greeter ministry that you haven't had before, or having a coffee hour that becomes a lunch hour, that you want to build relationships with people and you want to do things differently. The key is to absolutely pick a couple of goals and just jump in. Just jump in and begin to get those done. So these are really the key aspects of doing this. Try, be willing to fail, but implement what your goals are and go after it. So this, you will find, will be incredibly energizing work for your congregation. So Jenny, what do you have to say about some practical things for churches, small churches, and Invite, Welcome, Connect?
First, it's so great to see everybody's faces. He just stopped the screen share, so that's been really nice. That's nice to see. And I will say, Mary, I told you in the chat, I know our small church people, they want some practical things to get us started. So let's start with some practical pieces of what we can do to be in our small churches, to be welcoming. And is the first thing I've done, instead of saying welcome the visitor, which of course the Episcopal Church, our people are so good at welcome. It says expecting the visitor, because one of the harder things to do in our small church is expect someone new to walk through the door. And so what we have to start to do is change our thinking behind who's going to be there every Sunday, to expect saying we're going to have new people showing up to be with us on Sundays. And one way to do that is to make your church look alive. So I know this sounds silly, but you see them everywhere. I could say right now, if you saw flags flying outside of a business that was like open, you know that they're there. Well, the one thing about our small churches is they're often tucked back off the highway or deep into neighborhoods. This is, really by design. And so over the years, what's happened is our churches have sort of disappeared into the landscape. And so what we need to think about in our actual landscape is how to draw people's attention back to knowing that the church is there. And you do this in several different ways. You can, quite literally, if you wanted to, fly a flag that just says, put your Episcopal Church flag out front to fly on Sunday mornings, or put, some sort of worship flag out. It does seem like I can already hear some of the feedback, which might be, well, that could be slightly, I'll use the word tacky, but what it actually does is just show people that there's people worshiping in this place. And that is really the goal. The second piece of this is that signage does matter. We don't often invest in signs to tell people what's happening in our churches. And so one of our most effective tools has been to show that signage on the road makes a huge difference. Signage is also relatively inexpensive for this. So this is one of the churches that I have been working with for years now. This is St. Stephen's in Forest, Virginia, a small worshiping congregation that when we started working had about 19 ASA and is now up to 51 ASA. And one of the reasons is because they look alive now. They always have signage out front. You can see the types of signs that they have. They have blessing of the animals. They have trunk or treat. And then just a regular Episcopal Church sign. A couple of hints about signage, if you do go this direction, is make sure that it is perpendicular to the road. I know that sounds silly, but the number of places that I visit whose signs are parallel, you cannot see a parallel sign when you're driving by. So perpendicular signs, double-sided, can be seen in traffic both ways. You also want to make sure that they're not dated. And that way you can use your sign year after year after year, or have a place to replace the date. That is easy for you to do. These signs on average run about $85. You can get these in multiple different places, but Canva is a great place that you can do that. Then when you're looking alive and people know that you're there, I keep reminding our Episcopal churches that an Episcopal church right now, people are really interested in what we say, our theology, and are interested in visiting. So if they see you on the outside, they may be tempted to come on the inside. And once they're there, what I do hope that you will think about are just some very basic things to welcome the single person who walks through the door. First of all, a welcome bag or a gift. This does not have to be complex, and it should be authentic to who you are, which means if you all are a congregation of bakers, perhaps you do many loaves of bread. You maybe just have someone bring 2 a Sunday or even 1 a Sunday, just so you have something available. Perhaps you could have a small cross inside a bag that just has your business card tucked inside. People are, mugs have been trends. Lots of pamphlets have been trends. And what I tell our congregations, particularly our smaller congregations, is this is a large output of money, and something small and simple is just as effective. The other thing I will say is that if you are expecting visitors, expect visitors with children, because so families right now are absolutely looking for churches that will help raise their children in a faith background. And so if we don't have anything for a child, that is going to say a lot when they walk through the door. And so this also does not have to be complicated. A couple of board books, and then I'm going to pop into the chat here, or Steve will for just a second, a resource called Sermons for Kids. This particular resource is free, and you can do a daily bulletin, a weekly bulletin inside of this. Just print it out and pop it into the bag. If you just have sermons for kids and no bag, that is fine. But to have something for them to write with, something that for them to do during the service says that you intentionally thought about what a child would need when they come to your worship service. And they're not expecting a slide or a playground or this great big, they are just expecting to know that their child was listened to and prepared for. The final thing I'll talk about is the passing of the peace. We do this in our churches so well, but I will tell you, not every church, not every different denomination does the passing of the peace. So this can be a very intimidating time for someone where the welcome can go wrong fast, which means you must welcome the visitor during the peace to the authentic way that you are as a congregation. And I'm going to talk about that really quickly. If your congregation hugs every single person during the peace, then the visitor needs to be greeted by most of the people during the peace. They don't need a hug, but they do need to be greeted, because otherwise 25 people are receiving hugs and one person is standing alone, or 2. And the commentary I hear regularly is we don't want them to feel uncomfortable. What's more uncomfortable, being greeted or standing alone while everyone else is being greeted? If you're a congregation that just holds up the peace sign and everyone sort of stands in, oh, wow. Or we could have balloons for everybody. You hold up the peace signs and you just stay in place, then do that to your visitor too. It would be awkward is if everybody else is passing the peace sign and then everyone walks up to greet the visitor with a handshake. That's not authentic to your congregation. So be authentic to you, who you are, and greet your visitor in the same way. My final piece of advice as we are thinking about expecting the visitor in a small church: you don't have to do everything, but what you do well. So put your resources in places that you feel very comfortable and confident in the work that you do well. Mary, did you have a couple of things you wanted to add?
Yeah, there are a couple of things I wanted to say, just from my experience of working with churches on signage. You know, people are clueless about what the Episcopal Church is. And we have an opportunity through our signage sometimes to even relay our theology in a super simple way. Today in America, you know, our country is so divided, and a lot of people are like, they're weary of super conservative churches, and you know, and don't know where to go, and they think all churches are alike. I've worked really hard with a church in Virginia that when 3 years ago they started out, they had 35 people on Sunday. Today they have 199. One of the things, and I'm not saying all small churches are going to grow like that. They had a previous history of being larger. But one of the things they did was put a sign in front of their church that said, "All welcome, no exceptions." All welcome, no exceptions. Because that's the theology of that church. That's the Episcopal theology too. And trust me, that will get someone passing by wonder, what in the world do they mean by that? Or is this really sincere? And that I can be accepted with my questions. I can be accepted just for who I am. Yes. And they will testify to say that sign has made a huge difference for the curiosity factor of their visitors. And of course, since that time, they have organized their greeting. They've done so many things to follow up with people that really align with that. The other thing I wanted to say about children's ministry from a church outside of Detroit that I worked with, very small, they're about 30 on Sunday. They were concerned about their helping with children and children who are visitors. And so this is what they do. They take every priest, no matter whether it's supply visiting, whatever, part-time, if they see children in the congregation that Sunday, they ask the children to come forward to sit down, and they tell a little story. And then they send the child back to their seat and they continue with their sermon. That is so simple to do. And what it does is honor the children who are there. It's an incredible opportunity to say, you are special. And yes, come forward, sit down, let's talk a bit, let's tell a little story. And so size doesn't matter when it comes to doing that. And that's something that you can do on the fly. Because there may be Sundays when there are no children there, but there may be Sundays when there are children there. But what it says, it speaks to how much we honor children. So I just wanted to throw that in as another idea for a small congregation who can honor the children who are present. This is a subject that I feel so passionately about. I remember a church here in the Diocese of Texas that I was working with would invite Welcome Connect, and they said, you know, everybody knows each other here. Why would we have greeters? It may be that some of you have said that to each other. Well, there's a reason for having greeters, whether you have one visitor a year or you've got 50 visitors a year or 100 visitors a year. A greeter helps set the tone for the welcome and can actually impact the welcome culture of a church. And a greeter's responsibilities are different than an usher. Because people will also say, well, we've got ushers, why do we need greeters? An usher's responsibilities are rarely to start up a conversation with anyone coming to the church. And a greeter's responsibilities are absolutely to ask a person's name, perhaps initiate a conversation either before or after the service, and to gather some visitor information. There are a few other responsibilities of a greeter, and we have a new greeter document online. It's under the toolkit called Greeter Ministry, which goes into quite a bit of detail about what does a greeter do. And I'm just saying, It's so important because it impacts the culture so much to have greeters. And what you'll often find is after a church has had greeters that never had them before, after a year or two, they go, "We are such a welcoming congregation." And a lot of it started by being really nicely greeted. Either you've been a member there for 50 years or 50 days, to be sincerely welcomed. It really impacts your church. So they are a must, no matter the size, and they should be trained. Well, then people say, well, how do you train greeters? Again, there's a lot of what you can do in that greeter ministry document. Can literally go through some of the steps of greeting. It can also talk about the different kinds of greeters, and you have to decide how many we're going to have. Maybe you're so small that you only need one a Sunday. Larger churches may need 4 a Sunday, depending on their layout, their doors, whatever. Many churches have a welcome table or a welcome center, even if they're small. They have a place where information can be gathered, a welcome bag with a gift can be distributed, and visitor information gathered. But that can be done through conversation too. So greeters are super important. I recommend you reference that document online. A sincere welcome, asking good questions, listening, collecting visitor information, and following up is essential. Now, the follow-up is not the job of the greeter, but it's part of a systematic welcome process. When I opened this webinar today, I talked about sometimes we have to take on intentional practices that may be a little hard for us because we're much more casual about the way we do things as a small church. Well, this is one area where you need some process, where you need a system. It can be as simple as a greeter gathering some information and turning it in to the priest in charge or a parish administrator or a lay leader who may be responsible for contacting that visitor. Because here's the deal. If we're going to gather contact information, and again, in that document, it tells you what the simple stuff, the simple information you need to contact. These are not income tax reform forms. These are simple forms that say name, address, contact information, maybe children, number of children. That's it. That's all you need. But what's critical is if we go to the trouble to gather information, which we need to do, we must follow up. Somebody is assigned to follow up, to say thank you, either by text, by phone call, by video text, whatever way we do it. Formal letters are gone. They're absolutely a dinosaur. So all we need to do is just to follow up with that email or that text or a phone call that says, we were thrilled to have you, and we hope that you'll come back. Do you have any other questions about our church? And so a greater learning to ask questions is really important, because we want to hear what the visitor has to say, not so much how great we are to share with them, to tell them how wonderful our little congregation is, but we care enough to listen. And when you ask them some simple questions, which again, they're outlined in that document, a visitor will open up. You may say, well, what if a visitor doesn't, we see the body language, they don't want to talk. You just greet them and let them go on their way. But in my experience with greeters, I'd say 95% of people want to engage in conversation, are more than happy to give their contact information. You know, they wouldn't be there unless they were looking for something. And if they're really looking for something, we may be the very thing they're looking for. So we need to be ready to respond to them. And because we need to do that, we need to gather that information. You know, Jenny, we've jumped ahead and we've got some time now to see if we have some questions or some chat comments. I know there were some about signage, which was really good commentary about checking with a www Canva Online. Also, sign companies everywhere in all towns will help you create a sign. I think they're just key. Listen to their advice about size of lettering, being able to read things from the road in a passing car, because sometimes our initial mistakes are we put too much information on a sign that can't be read by a car going by at 50 miles an hour. So, I mean, there are things we need to think about in signage that are really, really important. But so go check out your local vendors, also online. They're everywhere. You can find them through Google.
Mary,
What are some of the check comments, Jenny?
mention one more thing?
Sure.
When you were talking about your welcome, and we didn't do a whole slide about this, but I think it's worth all of us considering and really working our way into, particularly in our small churches, is just because we're small churches doesn't mean we don't need to be technologically relevant. And how we interact with our visitors, particularly in the first phase of welcome, can not just be, which we can have paper and pencil and write their names down, and that is a perfectly acceptable way to do that, as long as that's there and easily accessible to hand to a visitor. But by and large, these days, people are very comfortable filling out an online form. And
Yes.
so to a simple, like a QR code is everyone knows now is ubiquitous. And that takes you to a form. And that is so much easier to disseminate to different kinds of different people to be able to contact. So I do want to push us to say, just because we're small doesn't mean we don't want to do to kind of be on the cutting edge of some of the technology as much as you're comfortable with. But it is helpful and it speeds up the ability to follow up.
Right. And in our next couple of webinars, our final one in January on Invite, we will get into social media a bit, and which is an essential time to really change for the church. And we have to jump in and be willing to utilize the tools that many of them are absolutely free that we can use to get the word out about our churches. So, Steve, are you there? And can you find any of the chat? Or if not, open up. We've got a little bit of time.
That Santiago Rodriguez had asked a question about how we kind of foster a culture of welcome within the small congregation.
Yeah, can I answer a little bit of that real fast, Steve? I saw Santi's question. One thing that I want to say is that oftentimes people are hesitant to invite people to church or to extend an invitation because they're worried about the kind of welcome that person might receive. What I will say, since we're on this welcome webinar, is that the intentional work that goes behind an effective welcome when a visitor comes to a church, these simple steps, really just having a few things in order for a visitor honors the invitation. Because many of us are hesitant to invite people. So when we do go out on a limb and invite someone to church, we honor that invitation by being ready and expecting the visitor. So I think, Santi, that is one way to create a culture of invitation, is to really be prepared to welcome a visitor well. To take also the person who extends that invitation off the hook, our work is to extend the invitation and to provide opportunities for invitation, but it is the Holy Spirit's work to actually connect a person within a congregation. So what I do really encourage you to talk about with your own people is that the Holy Spirit is active in this and you are not alone. So to take that pressure off and creating this culture of invitation, which is we are the conduit, but once they're there, we want to honor the invitation by being prepared, and we want to let the Holy Spirit do the work.
There is a wonderful scripture from Hebrews 13:2, and it says, "Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, For by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. We've got to trust that God is moving the hearts of people to seek God in community. And they're going to do that by trying to find a church. And it's scary, especially for unchurched people. We do a lot of greeting at my own church, and I organize greeters in my own church. You would be surprised how many people, when we ask them the question, are you familiar with the Episcopal Church? And they say, no. I'm shocked at how many people are looking for a church nowadays. And so that means that a couple of the little things we need to do is that we need to have some resources ready for them that tell you about the Episcopal Church. We have some of those links on our website. And it's really important to say, well, just welcome and offer to share those resources with them. You might have handy. And also, this is a time that almost all churches have worship bulletins, unless they do something projected on a screen, which some of our Episcopal churches do. But that we can very easily put in our bulletins the color of the prayer book, the color of the hymnal, when we kneel, when we stand, instructions for going up to communion. All those things in a bulletin help make a visitor feel a little more comfortable. Just imagine walking into our liturgy if you have never experienced anything like that before. That's part of the work of Invite, Welcome, Connect, is just imagining walking on your church grounds like you've never been there before and noticing things you haven't seen before. Going into our service and imagining you've never been in a church service like this, and how would it make it more comfortable for them? Because I guarantee you, if we are not ready for this, the likelihood they may be scared by our liturgy, and we don't want them to be. So those are simple things we can do to make changes, to really say we care enough about you as a visitor to welcome you with these materials that will help you get through our worship service.
Jenny.
I do see Susan had dropped a question about this is why it's called family church. Susan, is because it is hard for outsiders to feel welcome into the family setting. And again, one of the things that what we have to do within our small churches is to have the desire to sort of shake that up a little bit, and for our families to begin extending invitations to the people that they know, to invite them into the church. I don't want to say into the circle, but into the church, because that is really such a difficult dynamic in our churches. And that goes back to the video we saw. Everybody stops and looks. But what we do want to do is have our families extend invitation to invite people in. I think we are about to kind of run out of time, but what I will say is that, at least in our diocese, when I'm working with our small churches intentionally, and they're working to do that shifting of what the paradigm has been and trying new things, our small churches are growing. Like, about a little over 50% of our churches are seeing increases in attendance, and it's because of the work of just adding new things or going outside of their comfort zone, and being ready for the visitor. So I just want to encourage everyone to start with something. Just pick something and start. Shake the ground underneath your feet. Decide what your congregation is capable of doing, and do it, and see what happens, and see how God is moving your congregation in new directions through this.
Absolutely. And I really, maybe it's because my background is as a teacher, I just really feel it's important to pull your congregation together and say, we're going to try some new things. have a meeting, 35 of you, 40 of you, that said, we're going to try some new things because we believe God is calling us to serve people who are looking for a place to worship and be in relationship. And if you can remember that this is about relationship, it's huge. This isn't just a format of we get your information and we're going to contact you. No, this is about caring from a sincere place that we want people to be a part of our worshiping community. And so it's important sometimes to even shift that mindset a little bit. So working with everyone, starting with that single goal or two goals, and getting a small team together and becoming familiar with some of these practices, both online, in the book, some additional things we're going to offer through our next two webinars, which are coming up in November 19th and on January 21st. We're going to talk about Connect, and also we're going to use the opportunity for some of the things y'all have raised to go a little bit deeper into some of those subjects in our next webinar. And if you, after this webinar is over, if there's something specific that you want us to talk about, send an email, IWCteam at invitewelcomeconnect.com with, say, please talk about whatever. And Jenny and I will make an effort. We'll be with you for those next two webinars on November 19th and January, I believe it's 20 or 21st.
21st. In addition, Mary, just so also folks know, if you want to know more about Invite, Welcome, Connect in general, or you want to introduce it to other people in your congregation, in December, we're also having kind of an overview introduction webinar to Invite, Welcome, Connect. So please encourage you to see that. I've put our events page in the chat. Other closing notes, Mary and Jenny, or shall we?
I'd say thank you. Thank you for taking the time out. You deeply care. You wouldn't be here unless you love God and you love God's church. And we all really want our ministry to thrive and to be able to share the faith, the life-changing faith that we experience as Episcopalians. And so it is really incumbent upon us to make the efforts to do what we do intentionally with the heart for other people, and having faith that God's going to bless our efforts. And Jenny, do you have any final words?
I really do. So, part of my work in supporting our congregations is resourcing them to get them started. And I know that that's one of the great challenges of our small churches, is figuring out where to get started. If I've dropped my email in the chat, feel free to reach out to me if you're looking for just some specific ideas, or I'm happy to support your work too as best I can. I mean, I have my full-time job, but if I'm here to serve God's kingdom and you're part of that, and I really want us to see our small churches feel like they can launch, and that they've got something to give. And truly, when you get to those points, our small churches are growing because people want to be a part of this ministry in the Episcopal Church.
All right. Well, can we all just kind of give a little show of appreciation for Mary and for Jenny for this presentation? Thank you both very much. Thank you to everyone for being here. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I hope we're going to see you on future webinars. Hope to see you as subscribers to Invite, Welcome, Connect on demand, which you can find out about on our website as well. But encourage your friends to come out and see what we're doing and how we're helping to transform churches and transform the hearts of congregations. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.